This is ridiculous. Hello. If you're new here, my name's Allie. This is not my ideal situation, but here we are. There's no natural light because it's raining, and I'm sitting in a chair. Just not what I enjoy doing. But after a month of intensive testing of eyeshadows to the point where I never want to wear eyeshadow again, I'm going to follow up on the Instagram series that I did in November for Gratitude Month. I was trying to show my thankfulness for makeup that I've purchased with my own money, which is such a weird concept, so materialistic, but here we are. I tried to film this video once and I had some technical difficulties, so hopefully we can get through it this time. So this is a collection of 30 eyeshadow palettes that I'm kind of just giving my thoughts on after testing them, saying what's worth the money, what's not. Only a couple of them are limited edition and not available anymore, so I'll discuss those and kind of like if they come back again or what's similar to them that you could go out and purchase yourself if you wanted them. But ultimately, no one needs 30 eyeshadow palettes, so I tried to narrow down some that were like, you know, ones you could have that would be like your one-stop shop. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. Also, any clicking, my husband's right next to me, so yeah. I'm also using artificial light, which isn't my favorite. I just feel like it washes things out and makes things look a little bit different. I will be inserting swatches. I'm just going to do it at the end so that I'm not swatching on my hands and having to clean it off and all of that jazz. Just not ideal for the moment. So let me get on my Instagram so I can do this in the correct order, shall we? So day number 1 was the Jaclyn Hill Morphe palette, the original, and then the Jaclyn Hill Morphe Bling Boss palette. For that one, I actually did a Halloween look because I technically didn't start this series in November. I technically started it in October. So I'm going to start on a positive note and talk about the Jaclyn Hill and Morphe palette. This is actually one of my all-time favorite palettes. The look I created, I used this purple, this like bluish purple, and I used some of that teal. I believe I used one of these, but I can't remember which one. And all the rest came from the Bling Boss palette. This palette, like I said, is a good one-stop shop. If you like warm shadows and if you like color, there's not too much cool tone action going on, but if you like warm tones, this is definitely a good palette to have. You just have a lot to choose from. So in my case, I don't mind having a lot of choices, but I prefer something a little bit more condensed. But if you're the type where you just want one palette and that's it, you don't need much more, this is a really good option. She explains in her video when this came out about how there was like all different types of formulas in the palette, which I found very interesting, and when I used it I could definitely see that. This shade is like super powdery, but as a result it blends itself, whereas a shade like this isn't super powdery, but it does still blend well. This is like a super hard pressed shadow, which so are these shimmers. Like any of the colors are like super hard pressed, whereas a shimmer like this is like really loose, almost like a pressed sort of kind of pigment. So it's really interesting how all of these have like a different formula all encapsulated into one palette. But there's a lot going on here. I've created really good looks with it and I can definitely recommend it. It's not something that you need if you already have a palette that's like your one-stop shop for warm tones. The Bling Boss, on the other hand, is not in my collection anymore simply because I had a reaction to the shadows in it. I don't have a reaction to the purple in this palette, but for some reason the one in the Bling Boss gave me a horrible, like, I could feel it. I did a Violet Beauregard look, so I had like purple on my face and I could feel it all day and it started to itch. And after like 4 hours I had to take it off and I had like huge red blotches on my cheeks. That's an issue that I have. That's not an issue that everyone is going to have. Someone bought it from me from Poshmark and they love it. So that's a personal issue. It's not an issue with Morphe. I've used Morphe shadows in the past. I have this palette, I have other palettes, and that's not an issue that I have across the board. But I did want to mention for the second palette, that was the Bling Boss, and I don't have it anymore. So yeah, the formula is different than this, and it's more consistent across each individual shadow, whereas this, each shadow is different, if that makes sense. Alright, the second palette I used was the Urban Decay Naked palette. This was actually my first ever high-end eyeshadow palette, not this one. I actually had to get rid of my old one because I used almost every single shade in the palette. But this is what mine looks like now. This is now a discontinued palette, and they're coming out with like a Naked Reloaded or something like that, which I found really interesting. That looks nothing like this. I felt like this palette was so good, and I don't know why they discontinued it. So everyone's complaint was that there wasn't any deeper mattes, but you have the shade Creep, which is a matte with like glitters in it, and once you tap off your brush, the glitters are gone. The same with Dark Horse. I could use Dark Horse to deepen up the crease, and it was more like a satin matte formula. The shimmers in here are so good. This is a satin, so you can't use this to set the eyelid. It just looks crazy, but you can use it on the brow bone. And I love this palette. I believe for this one I used, judging by my lid, I probably used Half Baked and Sidecar, which are two of my favorites. I have a single of Sin that I use on my face, sometimes for a highlighter. But I love this. This is like my go-to for like a simple, like everyday neutral brown look. But I'm really sad that they discontinued it. It is a different formula than what I feel like they come out with now. They're a lot powderier in this formula than in some of their newer formulas, but it's still a really nice palette. And I had someone comment on my video that they are of a darker skin tone and this works for them, and I think that's awesome because I was concerned about recommending something that wouldn't work for all skin tones, but this seems to work for everyone. So I really like this palette. The fourth palette of the month was the Anastasia Sultry palette. My husband bought this for me because I wasn't going to buy it for myself because I was like, I don't need it, I have so many eyeshadows. But then he forced it onto me, which is fine because this is one of my all-time favorite palettes ever. I think in the look I used Twig, Dystopian, I believe I even used Noir, I know I used Cyborg, and I know I used Pearl, and I used Fresh to set the lid. This is a really nice cool tone palette, and I feel like a cool tone palette hasn't come out in a long time that I've been interested in. And I love this. The shimmers are such a different Anastasia formula than what you'll find in like Subculture or Modern Renaissance or any of the other ones. These are like true blue, like shimmery, glittery shades. The formula is a lot like Subculture, which is why I'm confused as to people like it, because people really shit on Subculture all the time, but no one is shitting on this. And I love Subculture, I'll be talking about it later, but this one is just, I mean, it's like pure perfection. It's like one of my favorite palettes that's come out this year. The packaging is A+ as well, but I love this. This kind of like reinvigorated my love for Anastasia because I think this is just such a nice palette. The only shade I don't really like is this Bloom shade, which is shocking because I would have thought like I would have worn that to filth. But yeah, my favorite shade is definitely Cyborg. I'm like getting a really good dip in it. But I love this palette, and I think if you haven't picked it up yet, I recommend doing so if you want it, because it's so nice. So nice. So the fifth palette of the month was the Chloe Morello Pretty Fun and Fearless palette volume 2. I actually got this in a makeup swap with my friend Samantha, who is on YouTube. I'll link her channel down below just for the fun of it, so if you want someone new to check out, you can check her out. But I've been wanting this palette, and I wasn't going to pull the trigger on it because it's a high-end palette and I'd never tried Surate's formula. But what I loved about this palette just on first glance was that you have warmer tones up here, and then you have cooler tones down here, and you have a mix of neutrals and colorful shadows. If I'm gonna have like if I'm gonna have a bigger palette, I want something that has a mix of like color and a mix of neutrals. So this one has that. These remind me of Lorac shadows, and I think I have a palette that I'm going to talk about later that was limited edition that you can't get anymore, and I think this is like a good alternative if you wanted that palette but you couldn't get your hands on it. This is kind of like a good trade-off. But the mattes basically blend themselves. Even the greens, which greens are really hard to formulate, and these basically blend themselves. And these pinks basically, they also blend themselves. Pinks are also pretty hard to formulate, and the purples in here also blend themselves. It's just an amazing palette, and you get a good range of really glittery shadows and then also like satiny shadows. So this was another one of my favorites, and yeah, I really liked it. And even though it's bigger, it's not as big as something like the Morphe Jaclyn Hill. So, which means the pans are a little bit smaller, but it's still such a good palette. I think you can still get it right now, but I don't know how much longer it'll be available. My next palette is the CoverGirl True Naked Peach Punch, which wasn't initially in the running to even be featured that month, but I got the news literally that morning that CoverGirl had gone cruelty free. So I went out and I wanted to get something from CoverGirl. And so I got a couple of foundations, a mascara, and I got this. This has an extremely strong peach smell, which is not my thing. It's not horrible, but it's not my favorite. But these shocked me for the price. I think this was an $8 palette. The packaging is definitely $8, but the quality inside is not. You have 4 mattes and 4 shimmers. The only shimmer that I don't like is this one. All the other ones perform amazingly. They're incredibly powdery, but they blend themselves basically, similar to like a Lorac formula. And they're quite pigmented, but they're not the type of pigment where it sticks in one spot and it's hard to blend, which has been my experience with a lot of drugstore eyeshadow palettes, is that they're really pigmented, but they stick kind of in one spot, and that hasn't been my experience with this. So I really like it. You can only get so many looks out of them, but these have a variety of types of eyeshadows, but this is the only one I've tried. So if you see a color that you like, I'm sure across the board they're pretty similar, because the good thing about CoverGirl and it being such a big brand is that they have better quality control than a lot of smaller brands. So they seem to put out products that are consistent throughout. Like their foundations are all bomb, their mascaras are all bomb, and I'm pretty sure everything is kind of consistent formula wise. But this is really good, and out of all the palettes I'm recommending, I believe this is one of the cheapest ones and one of the ones that I can recommend wholeheartedly. The next palette is the ColourPop Zodiac palette. It was a collaboration with Kathleen Lights. This one got a lot of hate for what I felt like was absolutely no reason. I do have to say I'm not the type that necessarily needs my eyeshadow palettes to make sense, but even with that, if you divide these up into quadrants, each of these has its own little quad that can kind of go together if you did want to simplify your look, or if you were the type of person that needed to simplify your look. If you're the type of person that you have trouble putting together looks because the palette colors are kind of all over the place, try to find a way to use it. Like you could even use this row by row. You can use it quadrant by quadrant, just however you need to do if you're the type that needs to visualize looks that way. I'm not. I can kind of go across the board. I guess I'm lucky that way. I don't know. But I loved this palette. In the particular look that I did, I used the Libra and I used the Pisces, but this month I also dipped into the Aries, and I really loved the look I created with that. I love this Capricorn shade. I love the Aquarius. I love this palette all around. I think this is one of ColourPop's best eyeshadow palettes, and I don't say that lightly because I have quite a few ColourPop palettes to show today, but just in general, I love ColourPop. I think their eyeshadow formula is one of the best. So I think this is well worth the money, especially if you're into Zodiac. I mean, I think it's really cool that they came out with a Zodiac collection, but this palette was one of my favorites. This was one of my favorite looks that I did for the entire month, and yeah, you're not going to see me dogging ColourPop in this video because I love this palette. So the next palette I want to talk about is the Too Faced Sweet Peach palette. One of the things I tried to do, if there was a palette that I've used multiple times in the past, I tried to pick colors that I don't normally dip into. So with this palette, I've used it several times. It's one of my favorites. I've talked about it before, but I tend to stay like in this region, in the peachy region. So I really wanted to branch out and kind of use some of the greens and some of the deeper colors. And so that's what I did for my look that I posted on Instagram. Too Faced has a very, in their tin palettes, a very hard pressed formula, which a lot of people aren't used to because I feel like the trend these days is really loose, powdery shadows. But with Too Faced, you kind of have to dig in to get pigment, and they don't kick up powder. These are really hard to hit pan on too. I've seen tons of people try. I've tried, and they're really hard to hit pan on. I like that about them though, because you know their shadows are going to last a long time. They don't expire really quickly. And their shimmers are interesting because they're not foiled like the Anastasia shimmers or like Morphe shimmers or anything like that. They're very much like a subdued full pigment shimmer shadow, which is just rare. Like, I feel like you don't get that a lot. I know one of the things with the ColourPop Zodiac that I forgot to mention is a lot of like the Pisces was really sheer, so I really had to build it up, whereas these are kind of like a one swipe and then you're good, but you need to use like a finger or something like that. These are really nice. I love this palette. I have most of their tin palettes because I just really like the formula of them. They're just such an interesting everyday palette. It does smell like peach. It's very artificially scented. The only peach scented thing I like is the Just Peachy Mattes palette. I think that one has a really nice peach scent, but this and the True Naked, they both have like a very like staunch peachy artificial scent, but I'm fine with that. But if you're sensitive to that, just be aware. This is a good travel palette. I really like this. I know there was some controversy about this, but it's one of my favorites. There was a point in which some of my looks that I started to do, I was running out of time during the day because I don't generally wear eyeshadow every single day, but I wanted to make sure that I had enough looks to go through the month of November. So this is one that I just kind of threw on, and this is a perfect palette for that. It's the Urban Decay Naked Ultimate Basics. I have a decluttering video coming up and I chose to get rid of this, but I'm actually going to end up keeping it. And the reason is this doesn't have the normal Urban Decay formula. They're not super powdery shadows. These are very hard pressed in the pan, similar to the Too Faced ones. But this is a really good like grab it and go palette. The shade that I used in that look, I believe I used these four. So Instinct, Tempted, Command, Nudie, and Blow. Those are the ones that I generally use. Every now and then I'll dip into Extra Bitter or Faith. I've also used Magnet before. The black shadow is the best. Urban Decay has the best black eyeshadow ever, hands down. The only one that's on par is the one from the Too Faced Semi Sweet palette, which I'm not featuring today. But this formula is just so interesting because they're matte, but they almost look dewy on the eyes. Not glossy, but just like healthy and juicy. They don't look like a dry matte formula, which some mattes can look like. This is one that I don't mind using all mattes. I never have to add a shimmer. And so I really recommend this. It also has a really good mirror because it's meant for travel. And I think that's apparent from like the packaging and the way that it's laid out and stuff. But this is just a really good eyeshadow palette. I wholeheartedly recommend it. I think it's really nice. It wasn't one of my favorite looks of the month, which I think is kind of why I contemplated getting rid of it. But it's just a simple palette and one that I can grab and always rely on to give me a good solid look. So I'm keeping it for now. I might get rid of it in the future, but I don't know. I'm enjoying it for the moment. Okay, now we're on to a palette that I don't have anymore. That's the Kat Von D Shade and Light palette. Kat Von D shadows just aren't my thing anymore. I used to really like them. There was a lot of things from her brand that I used to really love, but I realized that her eyeshadow formula is one that I don't like. Her mattes are very sticky, and what I mean by that is when you put them on your eye, they stick in one spot and they're really hard to blend. You have to make sure that your eyeshadow is set. Like, I mean, like layers of powder on top. And even then they kind of react like a cream does on top of powder because they almost have like a cream shadow formula. It's so weird. They definitely skip on the eyes. I have a picture that I'm going to show of me trying to do my eyeshadow and it skips. And it's crazy because I like the way that my eyeshadow looks, but I think part of the problem is like it's just a shade thing. Like, I love the way those shades looked on my eyes, but I don't love the way they perform. I've gotten rid of all of my Kat Von D palettes because I think, you know, her color stories are always really interesting, but it's the performance of the eyeshadows that just, it doesn't vibe with me. There's so many other brands out there that have better eyeshadows. I would definitely go with something like the Urban Decay Naked Basics or something like that before I would go with Kat Von D. So that one's no longer in my collection. That's how I feel about that. I'm not gonna say anymore because there's no point. A formula that I do love, and an eyeshadow palette that is now discontinued, is the Lorac Mega Pro 3. I coveted this. I bought it the day it came out and I've never looked back. I've never wanted to get rid of it. I've never contemplated getting rid of it. If this ever came back, I would buy a backup of it because it's so good. I've nearly hit pan on Mist and Dusty Mauve and Snow Kava. And then I have good dips in some other ones, but this is one of my favorite palettes. I love the Lorac Mega Pros have the mattes on top and the shimmers on the bottom. But I also love how the top one is mauve, and then this one is more like cool neutrals, and then we have cool neutrals and then like fun pops of warm colors. I just think the way that they set up these palettes is amazing. For the look I did on Instagram, I used Glacier, Dusty Mauve, Eggplant, Snow, and I think that's it. And I think Pink Cream. These are really pigmented without being overly pigmented, and they're really, really dusty, but they kind of blend themselves, which is why I like them. So this is one of my favorite formulas. I think Lorac in general is one of my favorite formulas, but this is the only one I'm featuring this time. It reminds me of the Chloe Morello a little bit because the Chloe Morello is divided by that like warm and cool tones. And I just think those palettes are so easy to use because they lend themselves to creating looks for you basically. And they both blend themselves. So I think this is really similar to Ciate London in the sense of like formula and stuff. So if you're into that, this is a really good one if it becomes available ever again. I know they brought back the Mega Pro, but this was the best. I think I hear most people talking about this one, but what do I know? Okay, the next one I want to talk about, I didn't even put it on Instagram. Like I didn't put the name of it. I just didn't want to cause controversy. I kind of wanted to nestle it in this video because anytime you mention this product, people either get really mad or people, you know, kind of get savage about it, and I'm just not into that. There's drama that I will consume, but this isn't the type, and I'm not gonna I'm not a drama channel, so it doesn't matter. I don't care about all the logistics of that. But this picture right here was from the Emily Noel Needs palette. I don't have it anymore. The reason is I just don't like the way these shadows perform. I think the palette itself doesn't really make any sense. There's like 3 shades that look almost exactly alike, and then you have this random purple with glitter in it. The face shades do not blend at all on the face. They look muddy, and I'm just not into it. I tried to make it work. I really wanted it. I coveted it because I love Emily Noel. I was so pumped when I found out she was coming out with eyeshadow. I think people have made it into something that it doesn't have to be made into, but that palette in particular, I wasn't a fan of it. And I think you can see from my look, like the whole eye look, it just didn't blend together. Like it wasn't cohesive. Like you can't wear those shades on the lid and then blend them out in the crease. They almost don't mesh together. Like every shadow, you put one on top of another and it like rejects it. Like it's just the weirdest formula I've ever experienced. Not into it at all. I do not like that palette. I don't recommend that palette. As much as I want to because I love Emily Noel. I hope she collaborates even with Makeup Revolution again, because I think Makeup Revolution has some amazing products, but that just wasn't it for me. So wasn't a fan of that. The next palette is one that I am a fan of. It's the Persona Identity palette, and the look I created, I called it kind of like my go-to everyday look, which is true, where I have some mattes in the crease and I throw something on the lid and I'm good to go. So for that one, I think I used Humble, Charming maybe. I actually don't really know which ones I used. I know I used Bombshell on the lid because that's the one I normally use, or was it Seductive? I actually don't know what I used, but I know that I love every shade in this, so just trust me on this. This palette is amazing. I actually got her pink palette, which I'm going to talk about in another video very soon because I love that palette. But I think Persona, like I love what her brand's doing in the sense that she's not coming out with a new collection every single week. Her collections are so, like it's product by product and it's coming together to become this amazing makeup brand. And she's doing something that a lot of YouTubers don't, which most YouTubers are coming out with like huge collections that don't really make sense. But her product, it's like product by product and turning into this amazing thing. So this was like her first release and I didn't buy it when it first came out. I actually waited until it was on sale at Ulta, and I would have bought it full price after trying it. But initially I wasn't sure, but I really love this. You have a mix of cool and warm tones. And this formula is slightly powdery, but not as powdery as some other ones that I've talked about. And these shimmers are like, they remind me of the Anastasia Mario palette, where you touch them once and slide them on the eye and they're just like the best shimmers. Like these shimmers are probably the best I'm going to talk about today. They're just amazing. They're like not like Lorac shimmers because you don't need a lot. Oh, I can't even explain it. You'll see it in the swatches. This is amazing. This is an amazing little palette. It's perfect for travel and I think it's just amazing. It's made specifically for brown eyes, but I mean, you can use it no matter what color eyes you have, but so pretty. It's one of my favorite ones that I tried. Okay, we're getting into some colorful eyeshadows. Next, I have the BH Cosmetics Weekend Festival palette. And this actually inspired me to get rid of a lot of my colorful eyeshadows, because once I got this one, I just decided I didn't need any other ones. And this one has a nice mix of cool tones and warm tones, but it's mostly warm. My favorite ones are the pinks and purples in here. I think they're like the best. I've never seen anything like this swag color. Such a pretty purple. And then this Wicked color is gorgeous. This is really similar to the ColourPop Pisces color, except it's so much smoother and so much more pigmented than the one, and it stays on your eyes better than the one from ColourPop. We also get some neutrals. You have Carnival, you have Magical. That orange is amazing. Like, there's just so much you can do with this, and I think if you're just dipping your toes into color and you want something that'll like give you all of the things that you need in terms of warmer colors, this one is a really good one. It performs just like BH Cosmetics, like any of the other ones, like the Carly Bybel palette and stuff, not like their plastic ones, like their normal eyeshadows that also come in cardboard packaging. They perform like any of those, and I love it. If it's still available, I'll definitely link it, but this one is so good. I can highly recommend it, and I've used it way more than just the one time. I've used all of these several times. This is one that I've probably used in terms of colorful eyeshadow palettes. This is definitely the most colorful eyeshadow palette that I've used the most. So really like this one. Another ColourPop palette, the ColourPop Kathleen Lights Dream Street palette. I just love this palette. It's one of my favorites that I own. The only negative thing I'll say about it is these two shades. They look so similar, and they look so similar in the pan, and they look so similar on the eyes. And they're also slightly chunky, which isn't something I experienced with that. Wait, one of the pans fell out of this. This eyeshadow just fell out. So I had to clean up eyeshadow because this pan fell out, and I was just about to compliment this shade, but it's completely gone. So yeah, that's great. But aside from that, I love this eyeshadow palette. I think it's so nice. But I don't like these shades. I think they're really chunky. I've used the hell out of this eyeshadow palette. I've used every single shade in it. I think it's amazing. So if I was going to compare it to the Zodiac, like which one's better, I definitely like Zodiac better. But I think if you only like warm tones and you want something that's a little bit easier, this one is a little bit easier to use, in the sense that there's a lot less shades to choose from that are less scattered around. But really enjoy it. This was definitely one of my favorites, just not one of my favorite looks of the month. Probably the second most controversial that's on the list, maybe third if you count Kat Von D, is the Anastasia Subculture palette. I bought this when it was on sale. I didn't buy it when it first came out, and I didn't understand what everyone's issue with it was. It was incredibly powdery, but I find that the Modern Renaissance is really powdery. The Sultry is really powdery. I didn't find that I had issues with blending, except with the blue shades. The blue shades, I mean all blue and green shades, they have issues blending. But I didn't find that it was anything like too substantial. I don't really like the shimmers in here. Adorn is fine. I'll use it every now and then if I'm in the market for like a brown shimmery color. But Anastasia shimmers in general, aside from the Sultry palette, just aren't really my favorite. So I like this, I just don't, I love this palette, I just don't like the shimmers in it. And I do wish that they had like a cream color to set with, as opposed to this weird color that doesn't fit into anything else in the palette. So it's really nice. I don't know if it's discontinued. I'm not sure if they still sell it. I think that they should. I think it's crappy that everyone gave it such a bad rap when it really wasn't that bad of a palette, especially when it's on par with everything else. Plus, I think the color story is really interesting and kind of unlike anything we've ever seen before. Very like 90s grungy vibes, which is kind of what I use this palette for. There's also controversy because this is a different shade than the actual Fudge, which actually I don't have Fudge, I have Fawn, which Fawn is kind of a mix of Dawn and Fudge. But anyway, the Fudge I guess is different than the single, but I feel like companies kind of do that, so I don't know what the big deal is. But yeah, the outside actually isn't as dirty as some of my other palettes, which is really crazy, so I really like it. I think that this is well worth it if you can find it. I think you can still find it at TJ Maxx, but it does get some mixed reviews, so just be wary of that. Okay, we are halfway through The next one I have is the Dose of Colors Desi and Katie Friendcation palette. And this one kind of surprised me. It's really expensive. This is a pricey little palette. I'm sure it'll go on sale again because it was on sale at Ulta over the holidays. But I did think it was a little bit overpriced. But when you think about it this way, actually I think all of them, all 5 shimmer shades are the same formula as those single Block Party eyeshadows that Dose of Colors came out with that are like $20 a pop. And I think you get the same amount of product in here and they're the same, like they're the exact same eyeshadows. So if you look at it that way, it kind of does make sense. You also get 5 matte shades that blend beautifully in this palette. I've tried every single shade in here and all of them are up to snuff. They definitely perform like a $55 eyeshadow palette. I'm not saying that they don't perform well, it's just I think it's a little bit pricey. And I really like it. The mattes are exactly the same as the Dose of Colors, those like 5 pan eyeshadow palettes that they have. So they're very, very powdery. And then like I said, these are the same as their single Block Party eyeshadows, which are almost like a cream shadow formula. And they're amazing. I love, love, love these. My favorite shades are definitely like these two because they're the most wearable for every day. But this green's really cool too. So I think if you can get your hands on it, go ahead and do it if you want it. I would wait for a sale just because it's a little bit more pricey. But I bought this and the Fuego highlighter and I haven't been disappointed by either of them. And the packaging is really nice. It reminds me a lot of Sultry. But Dose of Colors eyeshadow is kind of unlike anything I've ever seen before. I don't know how to explain it verbally because I don't own like a makeup brand, and so I don't have the words for like what makes it so different. But their products are different, so they almost perform like luxury makeup. And for the price, I think that they should. But definitely really nice packaging. But what's inside is the true treasure of the product. The next I actually don't have anymore, and it's not because it didn't perform well, it's just because I didn't need it. The packaging was so bulky. It was a $5 palette that I got from TJ Maxx. It was called like Cafe Au Lait. I'll put a picture of it if I can find it. And it was really nice. If you're in the market for like a basically neutral brown eyeshadow palette, it blended well. They weren't very pigmented. You had to build them up a lot, but when you built them up, they didn't look heavy on the eyes. And there was this really unique, like almost like baby poop green in the palette, which I found really interesting. And I don't have any shade like it. It's just not a shade that I necessarily need. But it was a really cool palette. I liked it. It looked really pretty on the eyes. I added like a Ulta cream shadow on the lid just to give myself a little bit of something. But I really liked it. And it was the cheapest one that I'm going to be talking about today. But I think if I was gonna like talk about my favorite really cheap palette, it would definitely be the CoverGirl one. I think the CoverGirl one is way more worth the money, but that one palette was really nice. And I also have to see if it was even cruelty free. I just wanted to include it because it was like a really cheap option. But yeah, do with that information what you will. The next palette is one of my favorites of all time. It's the Juvia's Place The Deuce palette. Very much a pinky tone palette, which pink tones are like my jam. And the reason I like this one so much is because you can create so many looks with it, but you can also use these as face shades. So I frequently use Creme as a blush. You can also use Custard as a blush. You can also use Crepes as a blush. If you're really, really light, you can use Berry Mousse as a bronzer. And these two you can use as highlights. And I'm sure if you're deep, you could possibly use this as a bronzer. I can't speak to that, but doesn't really look like a bronzer color, like just to me, but I don't know. But these eyeshadows are really, really nice. This was a good introduction for me for Juvia's Place because I'm into bright colors, but I'm into very specific looks with bright colors, and I like the look I created with this. Like every time I look at it, it's just like gives me good vibes, if you know what I mean. And I love this palette so much. And you'll never run out of these eyeshadows ever. Like if anyone has hit pan on this, like I want to know who, because that's wild. Like how could you ever? These are hard pressed in the pan, but they blend really well. They're not like blend yourself type of shades. You do have to do a little bit of work, but not in a bad way. Some eyeshadows are just made that way. So this is a really good palette, and I like that it doubles as a face palette. So if you're traveling, you can bring, you know, one less palette if you have to. So really nice. Next palette, I'm not going to talk about it too much. It's the Viseart Golden Hour palette. And Viseart shadows are expensive for a reason, and it's because they're so dang good. This one isn't my all-time favorite that I have from them. I like their little like 6-pan theory palettes the best, but this is really nice. I just wish there was a shade in between like here and here. I have to pull like a bronzer or something out, but it's still really, really nice. I would love to pop these out and put them in the same Z palette that I have my like theory palettes in, because this is just a really nice like warm tone palette. The shimmers are amazing. I think Viseart shimmers are like unprecedented, and the mattes basically blend themselves. So these are really good. I actually like Viseart more than I like Natasha Denona, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. But I still I think these are amazing. I think these are so good. I want to talk about the biggest shock of the month, and that's the Huda Beauty Amethyst Obsessions palette. I did not expect to like this. I was 100% certain I was going to try this out and return it. I tried the rose gold palette from her and I hated it. The mattes were so hard pressed, and they were so patchy. They weren't sticky. They weren't like a sticky matte. They were just so hard pressed and just like gross, and they hurt my eyes. There was something in that I did not agree with. But this one is gorgeous. These are a lot powderier, and the shimmers are almost like cream shadows. Every look I've created with this I have absolutely loved, and these actually got a worse rap than the other Obsessions palettes, which makes me want to try those, because I thought this one was so good. When I got rid of the Bling Boss palette, I definitely felt that there was something missing in my collection in terms of purple shadows, which is why I picked this one up, because I don't wear purple shadows a ton, but I wanted something that I could use when I wanted like a purple look. And this definitely satisfies that need. It's definitely more of like, less of like a mauve and more of like a true like pinky purple, but I love it. The only one that I'm not a big fan of is this, because this shadow is just so hard pressed, and I think in the palettes that I've shown, like 3 of these have had this exact same shade, and every single one of them have been hard pressed. So I think it's something with the formula in terms of like creating a shadow that looks like that. But these 3 in the middle have like a cream shadow texture, and these 2 are my all-time favorites, and that's like my favorite matte in the palette. I just think you get so much, and there's like no wasted real estate. That's something that's been bothering me about a lot of eyeshadow palettes, is that I feel like there's so much wasted space, whereas in this there's no wasted space. It's so small and compact, but you get so much in such a small amount. So definitely worth it in my opinion. Huda is not my favorite person in general. I'd rather support other brands, but I just haven't found a palette that works just as good as this. So we're almost done. The next palette is the You Had Me at Hello palette from ColourPop. I think this was supposed to be the Kathleen Lights packaging for Dream Street. Someone says if you know what, I kind of want to. They say if you peel off the sticker, Kathleen Lights is underneath, which honestly, like, that bothers a lot of people, but to me it doesn't really bother me, because in my opinion that means that, you know, rather than throwing a bunch of components away, they found use for it, which I think is like what you should do. Okay, this is like impossible to get off, so anyway, I was about to spill some true tea, but I guess I'm not going to. But regardless, this is one of my favorite eyeshadow palettes, if you cannot tell. Every shade in here is perfection. This is like my subdued purple tone palette, because it does have a lot of those like mauve hues in it. And I think that these shimmers perform better than the Dream Street shimmers, that's for sure. But I love every single thing about this palette. There's not a color in here that I don't enjoy. ColourPop shadows, they just blend amazing. This is a good everyday palette if you're into these tones. But since I've already talked about 2 other ColourPop shadows, I'm not going to continue to talk about this forever. This is a really good one. I highly recommend it. I just love ColourPop. The next one is the Carly Bybel BH Cosmetics Deluxe Edition. And this one I love for like everyday looks, everyday rosy tone looks. You get some highlighters up here, and then you get some rosy tones, but can you see what I mean about wasted real estate? This palette could be half the size. Are you joking? But these perform really well. These are super powdery, like the powderiest that I'm going to talk about, like more powdery than Lorac, more powdery than Anastasia. just powder city. But these blend themselves basically. They're not as pigmented. You definitely have to build up the pigment, and they can look a little heavy on the eyes, which is different than some of the other ones I've talked about. But the highlighters are amazing, and you can also use the highlighters on your eyes, and you get something for a variety of skin tones, which I think is important when you're creating a face palette as well as an eyeshadow palette. I think these shimmers and the mattes would work for a variety of skin tones as well. So I've already talked about BH palette again, so I'm not going to beat a dead horse or anything, because this is right on par with the BH Cosmetics Festival palette in terms of formula, just very different in terms of color. A palette that surprises me every time I use it is the Alamar Cosmetics eyeshadow palette. What surprises me is how many compliments I get on this palette every time I wear it. In the look that I'm wearing in my photo, this is the shadow I have on the lid, which is like the most unique eyeshadow I have in my entire collection. Like, I have nothing that looks like this. And these mattes, they're slightly powdery, but mostly they're hard pressed in the pan, and they're beyond pigmented. They're the most pigmented eyeshadows that I own, like on par with Natasha Denona eyeshadows in terms of pigmentation, like crazy. And the shimmers remind me of pretty much nothing. Like, I don't have anything even remotely like this, which I think is refreshing. This performs like a luxury eyeshadow palette, and I think it's $28. So I love supporting smaller brands for sure, but like, this is like beyond. Like, I get compliments every time I wear it, and I can only create so many looks with it because you only get so many shades to choose from. It's so good. It is such a good eyeshadow palette. Okay, 3 more to talk about and then I'm done. The most expensive of the bunch is definitely the Natasha Denona Star Palette. As you can see, I've used this a lot. I've compared a lot along the way to this because Natasha Denona is a very interesting formula, to say the least. Her shimmers remind me of those Dose of Colors where they feel almost like a cream shadow, but they're almost a little bit chunkier and heavier. I prefer Viseart shimmers to Natasha Denona shimmers, and I also prefer their mattes too, because I think Natasha Denona mattes, they're a little bit stickier, so they definitely stick in one spot, but they blend a lot easier than something like a Kat Von D shadow. But this palette I think was so well thought out. It's one of my favorite palettes that I have in my entire collection, and I love that you can pop out the pans if you want to. I'm not going to be doing that, but you can, because I love the packaging of it. But I think this is just such a well thought out, cohesive palette, which isn't what I can say about a lot of palettes that I own, especially a lot of palettes that come out nowadays. I've heard she's changed her formula, which is so disappointing because this formula is so wonderful. The only shade I don't like in here is this one because it's super, super chunky, but every single other shade in here I love, especially this one. I think that's what I'm wearing in the look that I created with this palette, but one of my favorites. I do think it's worth the money, especially when you do like price per milligram or gram or whatever, but it is pricey, so keep that in mind. Okay, I have 2 more palettes to talk about. And the next to last one is the Modern Renaissance. This came back into my life because I got rid of mine because mine went bad, and my sister was like, hey, mine didn't go bad, but I don't use it. Do you want it? And I was like, absolutely. And I'm so glad it's back in my life because I love this palette. I've come to terms with the fact that I don't like the 2 satiny shimmers in here. I definitely like the mattes more, but this satisfies everything in terms of like my favorite pinky red eyeshadows. This one definitely hasn't gone bad. It performs so wonderful. My favorite shade in the whole palette is Love Letter. I think it's so unique and so different than anything I own. But I love this palette so much. I talked about 2 other Anastasia palettes, so I'm not going to talk about it too much, but this is amazing. I love it. Highly recommend it. And the last one is the Too Faced Chocolate Bonbons palette. I wanted to use one of the chocolate bar palettes, but I didn't know which one I was going to use. And I decided on this one because this one is my favorite in terms of the chocolate bar range. I definitely like the Sweet Peach better because the Sweet Peach is like or just peachy, whichever one that is. It's definitely my baby, but this one is my favorite cool tone palette. I think in the look, the only 2 shades I used were Cashew, Chew, and Cafe Oolot, but I love this palette. I've used every shade in it at least one time. And again, it's right on par with Too Faced, that harder press formula, but blends really well. So I'm not going to talk about it too much, but I definitely like renewed my love for it because I love this palette so much. And that is it. Thank you so much for sitting through this. If you made it to the end, please leave a comment down below with like a banana emoji or something, because I'm tired, I'm hungry, and I'm thirsty. Make sure you subscribe before you leave, and that's it. I will see you in my next video. Bye guys.